"Daddy, she looks hungry. Can I share my food for her?" said the little girl to the black single dad CEO. The wind on that Tuesday afternoon had teeth. It bit through Alara's thin coat, a threadbare shield against a world that had grown relentlessly cold. She sat on a park bench, a statue of forced stillness, her gaze fixed not on the gray sky or the skeletal trees, but on the small, precious figure of her son, Leo. He was 4 years old, a bundle of vibrant life wrapped in a puffy jacket that was just a little too big, a hand-me-down from a charity bin. In his small, mittened hands, he held the last of their food. A peanut butter sandwich, cut into 4 perfect squares, the way he liked it. Alara's own stomach was a hollow, aching cavern, but the sight of him eating, his cheeks full and his eyes bright, was a feast for her soul. She had eaten yesterday. It was his turn today. That was the simple, brutal arithmetic of their lives. A sleek, black car, silent as a shadow, purred to a stop by the curb. The polished chrome gleamed even in the dull light, a visitor from another universe. A chauffeur in a dark suit opened the rear door, and a man emerged. He was tall, dressed in a tailored charcoal overcoat that probably cost more than her last 6 months' rent. His face was a mask of stern focus, etched with lines of pressure and authority. Beside him, clutching his hand, was a little girl in a bright pink coat, her hair tied in 2 perfect puffs. They were clearly heading towards the little artisanal bakery across the street, a place with cakes in the window that looked like jewels. The little girl, however, had stopped. Her large, curious brown eyes were fixed on Alara. She tugged on her father's hand, her small voice carrying on the wind. "Daddy, she looks hungry. Can I share my food for her?" What happens when a child's simple question shatters the walls a man has built around his heart? Julian Vance did not like distractions. His life was a fortress of routine and control, built to protect himself and his daughter, Lily, from the chaos of a world that had already taken too much. He had been about to steer Lily towards the bakery, towards the promise of a warm croissant and hot chocolate, a scheduled treat in their highly structured day. But Lily's question stopped him. It was an anchor rooting him to the spot. He followed her gaze to the woman on the bench. He saw the worn-out coat, the way she hugged herself for warmth, the deep, purple shadows under her eyes. But more than that, he saw the fierce, protective love in her gaze as she watched her son eat. It was a look he recognized. He saw it in the mirror every morning. It was the look of a parent who would burn down the world for their child. For the first time in years, a feeling other than grief or responsibility pricked at the edges of his carefully managed composure. It was a disquieting empathy. He looked from the woman's gaunt face back to his own daughter, whose expression was one of pure, uncomplicated concern. How could he teach her to be a good person if he ignored the very lesson she was trying to teach him? With a sigh that seemed to release a breath he'd been holding for years, he gave a slight nod. "Of course, sweetie. That's a very kind thought." He walked towards the bench, his expensive leather shoes crunching softly on the gravel path. Alara saw them approaching and her body tensed. She instinctively pulled Leo a little closer, her mind racing through a Rolodex of potential threats. Men like this didn't approach women like her without a reason, and the reasons were never good. "Excuse me." Julian's voice was deep, a low baritone that was accustomed to commanding boardrooms. "My daughter. She was worried you might be cold." And hungry, he gestured vaguely towards the bakery. "We were just going to get something. We'd be honored if you and your son would join us." Alara stared at him, bewildered. She saw the little girl, Lily, peeking out from behind her father's leg, offering a shy, hopeful smile. Alara's pride, the last thing she truly owned, screamed at her to refuse. But then she looked at Leo, who had just finished the last bite of his sandwich and was now looking with wide, innocent eyes at the promise of the bakery. His hunger was more important than her pride. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling foreign and fragile on her lips. That's very kind." Inside the bakery, the warmth was a physical shock. It wrapped around Alara like a blanket, thawing the ice that had settled deep in her bones. The air smelled of sugar and cinnamon and coffee, sense of a life she used to know. Julian ordered for everyone, his movements efficient and precise. He bought 2 large hot chocolates, a croissant for Lily, a bear claw for Leo, and a coffee and a warm almond pastry for Alara. He didn't ask what she wanted. He simply provided, a quiet act of command that was both intimidating and deeply comforting. They sat at a small marble table. The silence between the adults was thick and awkward, a chasm of class and circumstance. But the children, as children do, bridged the gap. Leo, his face already smeared with chocolate, giggled as Lily made a funny face. Soon they were chattering about their favorite cartoons, their shared world of superheroes and talking animals rendering their fathers' and mothers' worlds irrelevant. Julian watched them, a rare, soft expression on his face. He found himself studying Alara. She ate her pastry slowly, deliberately, as if savoring every crumb. There was a quiet dignity about her, a grace that poverty had not managed to erase. She didn't complain or offer a sob story. She simply answered his polite, probing questions with brief, honest answers. Her name was Alara. Her son was Leo. She was between jobs, the euphemism hung in the air, heavy with unspoken hardship. He could see the truth in the frayed cuffs of her sweater and the weariness in her eyes. "It's hard to find work that fits around childcare," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Leo is my priority, I understand," Julian said, and he truly did. Lily was his. The thought of her wanting for anything, of her being cold or hungry, was a physical pain. He felt a strange, unwelcome kinship with this woman. When they finished, Julian walked them back towards the park. The interaction felt incomplete. He couldn't just leave them to the mercy of the biting wind. On impulse, he pulled a sleek, leather wallet from his coat. Alara's eyes widened in alarm, thinking he was going to offer her cash. The thought was humiliating. But he didn't pull out money. He extracted a business card, thick and embossed with a simple, elegant logo. Julian Vance, CEO, Vance Sterling Holdings. "If you're looking for work," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "My company is always looking for good people. My assistant's number is on the card. She handles all our recruitment." It was a clumsy offer, a lifeline disguised as a corporate formality. Alara took the card, her fingers brushing his. A tiny spark of warmth passed between them. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She had no intention of calling. Felt like charity, and she couldn't bear it. She would find a way. She always had. They parted ways, Julian and Lily getting back into their warm, silent car, and Alara and Leo heading towards the bus stop, the business card feeling heavy and impossible in her pocket. The next morning, an official-looking envelope was taped to her apartment door. The stark, red letters of the eviction notice screamed at her. The landlord wanted 2 months back rent by the end of the week, or they would be out. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. For hours, she sat at her small, wobbly kitchen table, the notice in one hand and Julian Vance's card in the other. Her pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Leo's future was all that mattered. Meanwhile, in a sprawling corner office overlooking the city, Julian couldn't focus. The image of Alara's weary, beautiful face was superimposed over his spreadsheets. He summoned his executive assistant, Mrs. Gable, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and an almost supernatural efficiency. "That donation inquiry we spoke about," he began, choosing his words carefully. "The young woman in the park yesterday. I want you to look into her situation, discreetly. Find out what she needs." Mrs. Gable, who had worked for Julian since before his wife passed away, understood the subtext. This wasn't a corporate donation. This was personal. Within hours, she had a full report. Alara Hayes, recently laid off from a diner that went out of business. A spotless work record. No family in the city. And an eviction notice. The information settled in Julian's chest like a stone. He thought of Lily, safe and warm in her room down the hall from his. The disparity was a physical ache. He couldn't just send a check. That felt too easy, too impersonal. It wouldn't solve the underlying problem. He needed a solution, not a temporary patch. And then, an idea formed, one that was both logical and, on a deeper level, deeply selfish. He wanted that warmth, that quiet dignity, in his own home. He wanted Lily to be around that kind of gentle strength. "Mrs. Gable," he said, his voice firm, "I need a new companion for Lily. Someone live-in. Draft an offer. A generous one. Include a private suite, a full salary, and benefits. Send it to this address." As Mrs. Gable left to carry out his orders, Julian's phone rang. It was the number from the card. A hesitant voice on the other end said, "Hello? I'm calling for Mr. Vance. My name is Alara Hayes." Julian felt a surprising jolt of relief. She had reached out. The universe had, for once, met him halfway. The offer felt like a dream, an impossible fantasy. A job, a home, security. It was everything Alara had been praying for. The interview was to be held at the Vance Sterling Holdings Tower, a monument of glass and steel that scraped the sky. Dressed in her only presentable blouse and a pair of black slacks, Alara felt like a sparrow trying to blend in with peacocks. The lobby was a cavern of marble and hushed importance. Mrs. Gable greeted her with a warm, professional smile that immediately put her at ease. She was led to Julian's office on the top floor. The room was larger than her entire apartment, with one wall made entirely of glass, offering a godlike view of the city below. Julian stood to greet her, looking even more imposing in a sharp suit than he had in the park. He gestured for her to sit on a plush leather sofa. The interview began formally. He asked about her experience, her skills, her approach to childcare. Alara answered honestly, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke about what she knew best: caring for a child. She spoke of patience, of fostering creativity, of the importance of listening. As she spoke, Julian found himself captivated. She wasn't just giving textbook answers. She was speaking from the heart. He knew, with an unshakable certainty, that she was perfect for the role. He decided to conduct a small, private test. "I apologize," he said, rising from his desk. "I need to speak with my legal team for a moment. Please make yourself comfortable. I'll be right back." He walked out of the office, intentionally leaving his wallet on the corner of the coffee table, a few crisp $100 bills peeking out from the edge. It was a cynical move, born of a world where he was constantly being sized up for his wealth. He waited in the adjoining conference room for 5 minutes, watching the second hand on his watch tick by. When he returned, Alara was sitting exactly where he had left her, her hands folded primly in her lap. She hadn't moved. As he sat down, she gestured towards the table. "Mr. Vance," she said quietly, "you left your wallet." He felt a wave of shame for his suspicion, followed by a profound sense of respect. She hadn't just passed his test. She had shown him how flawed it was. "Thank you, Alara," he said, his voice softer now. He then laid out the full terms of the offer: a generous monthly salary, full health benefits for both her and Leo, and a private 2-bedroom suite within his penthouse apartment. Alara listened, her heart pounding. It was too much. Felt like a trap. "Mr. Vance." "Julian," she corrected herself, feeling a sudden need for directness. "This is an incredible offer, but I have to be honest. My situation is desperate. I don't want you to think you're hiring me out of pity. I need to earn this. I won't accept charity." Her integrity was breathtaking. She was at rock bottom, yet she refused to be seen as a victim. "Pity is the last thing on my mind," Julian said, his voice sincere. "I am a single father with a demanding career. My daughter is the most important person in my world. I need someone I can trust completely to help care for her. From what I've seen and from what you've said, you are the most qualified person for that position. This is a business arrangement, Alara. One that I believe will be mutually beneficial. To formalize it, he had Mrs. Gable draw up a detailed employment contract, outlining her duties, her hours, her compensation. He wanted her to feel secure, not indebted. Alara read through the contract, the black and white letters a tangible promise of a new life. For Leo. It was always for Leo. With a hand that trembled only slightly, she signed her name. "When can you start?" Julian asked. "As soon as possible," she replied, the eviction notice searing in her mind. "Good," he said, a small, genuine smile finally touching his lips. "Welcome to the family, Alara." The word hung in the air between them. Family. It was a word neither of them had used lightly in a very long time. Moving into Julian's penthouse was like stepping onto a different planet. Alara and Leo's worldly possessions fit into 2 cardboard boxes and a duffel bag. Placed in the entryway of the sprawling, minimalist apartment, they looked laughably small and out of place. The penthouse was a masterpiece of modern design. Cool gray tones, polished concrete floors, vast expanses of glass. It was beautiful, sterile, and silent as a museum. Their suite was luxurious, with soft beds, a private bathroom bigger than her old kitchen, and a window that overlooked the city lights. Leo was ecstatic, bouncing on the bed and calling it a castle in the sky. Alara felt a deep, trembling gratitude, but also a profound sense of dislocation. The first few days were a period of adjustment. Alara threw herself into her work, establishing a routine for Lily. She discovered the little girl was bright and sweet, but also lonely, accustomed to the company of rotating nannies who treated her like a job, not a person. Alara didn't just supervise Lily. She engaged with her. They baked cookies in the state-of-the-art kitchen, filling the silent apartment with the scent of vanilla and melted chocolate for the first time. They built elaborate forts out of sofa cushions in the vast living room. They read stories not just from books, but from their imaginations. Leo and Lily, being close in age, became inseparable. Their giggles and the pitter-patter of their feet echoed through the long hallways, chasing away the ghosts of silence. Julian, at first, remained a distant figure. He left for the office before the children were awake and often returned after they were in bed. But then he started noticing small changes. A child's colorful drawing of a lopsided flower taped to the stainless steel refrigerator. The lingering smell of freshly baked bread when he came home. One evening, he came home earlier than usual, exhausted from a grueling day of negotiations. He was about to retreat to his study when he heard the sound of Alara's soft voice coming from the living room. He paused in the shadows of the hallway and watched. Alara was sitting on the floor, surrounded by cushions, with Lily and Leo nestled on either side of her. She was reading a story, her voice animated, her expressions bringing the characters to life. The children were utterly captivated. A warm, golden light from a nearby lamp illuminated the scene, making it look like a painting. It was a portrait of peace, of contentment, of home. A profound ache bloomed in Julian's chest. His house, for all its luxury, had not felt like a home since his wife, Maya, had passed away. He had filled it with expensive things, but he had forgotten to fill it with life. Alara and Leo had brought life back into its sterile walls. He began to make a conscious effort to come home earlier. He would sit at the kitchen island, ostensibly working on his laptop, but really just listening to the happy chaos of the children's bath time. He started joining them for dinner, sitting at the head of the large, formal dining table that had previously only been used for business functions. At first, the meals were stilted, but the children's innocent chatter slowly eroded the formality. "Julian, why is your fork so shiny?" Leo would ask. "Alara, can we have pancakes for dinner tomorrow?" Lily would plead. Slowly, Julian found himself being drawn into their small, warm world. He learned that Alara had a dry sense of humor and a quick, intelligent mind. He saw the way she looked at Leo, with a love so fierce and pure it was almost tangible. He realized he was beginning to look forward to coming home each day, not to the silence of his apartment, but to the sound of her voice and the laughter of their children. The distance between them was shrinking, the chasm of their different worlds slowly being filled, one shared meal and one quiet observation at a time. One rainy Saturday evening, the city lights blurred into a watercolor painting outside the penthouse windows. The children were asleep, their gentle breathing a soft rhythm in the quiet apartment. Alara was in the kitchen, tidying up, when she saw Julian standing in the living room, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was staring at the mantelpiece, at a silver-framed photograph that was always kept perfectly dusted. It was the only personal item in the entire public space of the penthouse. The woman in the photo was beautiful, with a radiant smile and eyes that sparkled with life. Alara knew it was Maya, his late wife. She had always been careful not to stare at it, to respect the invisible boundary of his grief. Tonight, however, Julian seemed lost in the memory, his usual armor of control completely gone. He looked vulnerable, lost. Unsure of what to do, Alara simply began to make a pot of chamomile tea. The quiet, domestic sound seemed to break the spell. Julian turned, his eyes finding hers. There was no anger or annoyance at her intrusion, only a deep, hollow sadness. "That was Maya," he said, his voice rough. It was the first time he had ever spoken her name to Alara. Alara brought a steaming mug of tea over to him, placing it on the coffee table. She didn't speak. She just waited. "She loved rainy nights," Julian continued, his gaze drifting back to the window. "She would have loved all of this. The lights, the quiet. She was the one who filled this place with life. After she was gone." He trailed off, taking a long sip of his drink. "I think I just turned everything off. The house, myself. It was easier to function in the silence. It hurt less. I focused on work, on giving Lily everything she could ever want, except the one thing she needed most. A happy father. A real home." Alara sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands wrapped around her own mug of tea. She didn't offer empty platitudes like, "I'm sorry for your loss," or, "She's in a better place." She knew from her own experience with loss that such words were meaningless. Instead, she listened, offering him the rare gift of her complete, undivided attention. "Lily looks like her," Alara said softly. "She has the same light in her eyes." A single tear traced a path down Julian's cheek. He didn't bother to wipe it away. "She does," he whispered. "And I was so afraid. Afraid that, by letting happiness back in, I would be forgetting her, betraying her memory. But seeing you with the children, seeing this place feel alive again, I'm starting to realize that the best way to honor her memory is to live. To let our daughter live in a house filled with laughter, not just echoes." He looked at Alara then, his gaze intense and full of a raw, unguarded emotion she had never seen before. "You did that, Alara. You and Leo. You brought the laughter back in that moment." The last wall between them crumbled. He was no longer her employer, and she was no longer his employee. They were two lonely people, two single parents who had been battered by life, finding a moment of connection in a shared space of grief and nascent hope. The next morning, Lily came running to Julian, proudly holding up a piece of paper. It was a child's drawing, rendered in bright, waxy crayon. It depicted four stick figures, two large and two small, all holding hands under a giant, smiling yellow sun. "It's our family," Lily announced proudly. "That's you and me and Alara," and Leo. Julian took the drawing, his fingers tracing the simple, joyful lines. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He walked over to the stainless steel refrigerator and, using a magnet, placed the drawing right in the center, a vibrant splash of color in his monochrome world. It was a declaration, a symbol of the new life that was beginning to bloom in the ashes of the old one. The weeks that followed felt like a gift. The awkwardness between Julian and Alara melted away, replaced by an easy, comfortable rhythm. The penthouse, once a showpiece of architectural precision, transformed into a home. Toys were a permanent fixture in the living room. Tiny shoes were often left by the front door, and the air was constantly filled with the scent of Alara's simple, delicious cooking. Julian found himself delegating more at work, leaving the office at 5 o'clock sharp, an act that sent shockwaves through his company. The evenings became his sanctuary. He would help Alara with dinner, the two of them moving around the kitchen in a comfortable, unspoken dance. He would listen as she told him about her day with the children, her stories painting vivid pictures of their small adventures. He discovered she had a passion for botany and was slowly turning the sterile balcony into a lush garden of herbs and flowers. He, in turn, began to open up about his own world. He told her about the pressures of his job, the complex deals, the corporate politics. He found that explaining it to her, an intelligent outsider, helped him see his own challenges with new clarity. She was a phenomenal listener, her insightful questions often cutting through the noise to the heart of the matter. Laughter became the new soundtrack of their home. One evening, Leo, with the profound seriousness of a 4-year-old, asked Julian why he wore a sad suit all the time. Julian, for the first time in years, laughed until tears streamed down his face. The next day, he came home wearing a pair of jeans and a soft cashmere sweater, much to the children's delight. The change in him was palpable. The hard, guarded edges had softened. The perpetual frown line between his brows had smoothed out. His employees noticed he was more patient, more engaged. Mrs. Gable simply smiled knowingly. To celebrate the arrival of spring, Julian suggested a weekend trip to his family's old country house, a place he hadn't visited since Maya's death. The house was rustic and charming, surrounded by sprawling green fields and ancient oak trees. They spent the weekend disconnected from the city, taking long walks, having picnics by a small lake, and flying kites. In the evenings, they would build a fire in the large stone fireplace and play board games with the children. On their last night, after the children were tucked into bed, Julian and Alara sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars blanket the sky. The silence between them was no longer awkward, but filled with a comfortable, charged intimacy. "I haven't felt this peaceful in a very long time," Julian said, his voice a low murmur in the dark. "Me neither," Alara confessed. "I had forgotten what it felt like to not be scared all the time." He turned to look at her, her face illuminated by the soft moonlight. He saw her strength, her kindness, her quiet beauty. An overwhelming urge to close the small distance between them, to touch her, to tell her everything he was feeling, washed over him. His gaze dropped to her lips. She saw the look in his eyes, and her breath caught in her throat. The air crackled with unspoken emotion. It was a precipice, a moment suspended in time. But neither of them moved. It was too new, too fragile. The fear of ruining the beautiful, delicate thing they were building held them back. They were falling in love, slowly, cautiously, and with the terrifying, exhilarating knowledge that this was real. When they returned to the city, everything felt different. The unspoken feelings between them were a constant, humming presence. They were a family in all but name, a fragile ecosystem of hope they had built together. But ecosystems are vulnerable, and they had no idea that a storm was gathering just beyond their horizon. A storm from Alara's past that was about to break and threaten everything they had found. The storm arrived on a sunny Wednesday afternoon in the form of a man with a charming smile and hollow eyes. Alara had taken the children to their favorite playground near the penthouse. She was pushing Leo on the swing, his delighted squeals filling the air, when a voice from behind her sent a chill down her spine. Well, look at you, Ellie. Landed on your feet, didn't you?" She froze. She knew that voice. It was Marcus Thorne, Leo's father. A man she had fled from 2 years ago. A man whose charm was a thin veneer over a core of selfishness and manipulation. She turned slowly. He looked the same, handsome, dressed in clothes that were just a little too flashy, and with a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Marcus," she said, her voice tight, "what are you doing here?" "I came to see my son," he said, his smile widening as he looked at Leo. "And his mother. I heard you were living uptown now, doing very well for yourself." "I'm impressed." His words were laced with insinuation. He had clearly done his research. He knew about Julian. Panic flared in Alara's chest. This was her worst nightmare. She had built a safe, happy world for her son, and now the one person who could destroy it was standing right in front of her. "You need to leave," she said, her voice low and firm. She moved to stand between him and Leo. "This isn't the time or the place." "Oh, I think it is," he said, his smile never wavering. "I've missed my boy, and I've changed, Ellie. I'm ready to be a father." She knew it was a lie. Marcus only ever wanted one thing, whatever benefited Marcus. She managed to get him to leave, promising to talk to him later, anything to get him away from the children. That evening, she was quiet and distracted. Julian noticed immediately. "Is everything all right, Alara?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. She wanted to tell him. She wanted to unload the entire ugly story of her past with Marcus. But shame and fear held her back. This was her mess. She didn't want to bring its ugliness into his clean, orderly world. She didn't want him to see her as damaged goods, as someone with a complicated, messy past. "I'm just tired," she lied, forcing a smile. But the lie felt like a stone in her throat. Marcus called the next day. His tone was no longer charming. It was menacing. He told her he'd seen pictures of the penthouse of Julian's car. He said it was only fair that his son should benefit from such wealth. He wanted money, a lot of it. "Think of it as child support," he sneered. "Your rich boyfriend can certainly afford it. If not, well, a custody battle can get very ugly. And very public. I wonder what the press would think of a billionaire CEO shacking up with a broke single mom who keeps a father from his son." The threat was clear. He was going to use Leo as a weapon and her as a target. He would create a scandal that could damage Julian's reputation and his company. Alara was trapped. Julian, however, was not a man to be trifled with. He had seen the brief, tense interaction at the park from his office window. He had noticed Alara's subsequent distress. He trusted his instincts, and they were screaming that something was wrong. He had Mrs. Gable do what she did best: gather information. Within 24 hours, he had a complete file on Marcus Thorne. It was a litany of failed business ventures, unpaid debts, and accusations of fraud. He was exactly the kind of parasite Julian despised. He now understood the fear in Alara's eyes. She wasn't just dealing with an ex. She was dealing with a predator, and he would not let her face him alone. The crisis escalated faster than Alara could have imagined. Marcus, impatient and greedy, decided to force their hand. He tipped off a notorious gossip columnist. The next morning, a salacious story appeared online with the headline, "Billionaire Bachelor's New Love, Gold Digger with a Secret Past?" The article painted Alara as a conniving opportunist who had trapped the wealthy Julian Vance, hiding the existence of her child's father. It was filled with quotes from an anonymous source, clearly Marcus portraying her as an unfit mother. The story spread like wildfire. It was a direct assault on Alara's character and a major embarrassment for Julian's company. The board of directors was furious. Vance Sterling Holdings stock took a small but noticeable dip. Julian's estranged, society-obsessed parents called, demanding he get rid of the woman and end the scandal immediately. The pressure on him was immense. He was being advised by everyone, his lawyers, his board, his family, to cut ties with Alara, to issue a statement distancing himself and his company from her. It was the logical, strategic thing to do. But when Julian looked at Alara, he didn't see a scandal. He saw the woman who had brought laughter back into his home. He saw the mother who would starve herself for her child. He saw the person who had patiently listened to him talk about his grief and who had taught him how to live again. Betraying her was not an option. He found her in her suite, her meager belongings packed back into the same 2 cardboard boxes she had arrived with. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. Leo was sleeping soundly in the next room, blissfully unaware of the storm raging around them. "What are you doing?" Julian asked, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm leaving," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't let him destroy you, Julian. You've given us so much. I won't be the reason your life is ruined. It's better this way. We'll be okay." Her selflessness was a punch to the gut. Even now, with her own reputation in tatters, her only thought was to protect him. This was the ultimate test of her integrity, and she was passing it with heartbreaking grace. "No," Julian said, stepping forward and placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "It is not better this way. Look at me, Alara." She lifted her tear-filled eyes to his. "Do you think I care about the stock price? Or what the gossip columns say? Do you think any of that matters to me compared to what we have here?" His voice grew stronger, filled with a conviction that shook the room. "Before you and Leo came, this was just a place with expensive furniture. It was a shell. You made it a home. You made me whole again. I am not letting you go. We are not letting him win." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. She collapsed against him, the sobs she had been holding back finally breaking free. He just held her, stroking her hair, letting her cry it all out. "I have a plan," he said against her hair. "But I need you to trust me. We're going to fight this." Together, she looked up at him, her eyes searching his. She saw no doubt, no hesitation. Only a fierce, unwavering loyalty. In that moment, she knew she wasn't alone anymore. She nodded, putting her entire faith, her entire future, in his hands. The battle was about to begin. The next day, Julian Vance called a press conference at the headquarters of Vance Sterling Holdings. The room was packed with reporters and television cameras, all of them buzzing with anticipation, hungry for the next chapter in the unfolding scandal. The board members were in a panic, certain Julian was about to announce Alara's dismissal and begin damage control. They couldn't have been more wrong. Julian walked to the podium, not with his usual phalanx of lawyers and PR executives, but with Alara by his side, her hand held firmly in his. Behind them, holding hands, were Lily and Leo, looking slightly bewildered but safe and secure between the two adults. The room fell silent, flashes popping like fireworks. Julian didn't look at the crowd of reporters. He looked at Alara. He brought the microphone closer, his voice clear and steady, resonating with an authority that had nothing to do with his wealth and everything to do with his conviction. "Good morning," he began. "I've called you here today to address the recent rumors and speculation regarding my private life and, more specifically, regarding this woman, Alara Hayes." He paused, letting the tension build. "The stories that have been published are a collection of malicious lies, fed to the press by a man named Marcus Thorne, a man who is attempting to extort money from my family. My legal team has already provided the authorities with extensive evidence of Mr. Thorne's history of fraud and his threats against Ms. Hayes." Gasps rippled through the room. This was not the corporate apology they had been expecting. "But I am not here to talk about him," Julian continued, his voice softening as he turned his gaze fully on Alara. "I am here to talk about the truth. The truth is that Alara Hayes is the most honorable, courageous, and kindest person I have ever known. She is an incredible mother who has sacrificed everything for her son. And in the past few months, she has done something I thought was impossible. She has brought joy and light back into my life and the life of my daughter." He then looked out at the sea of cameras, his expression fierce and protective. "She is not a gold digger, she is the heart of my home. She is not a secret, she is my future. To be clear to everyone, my board, my shareholders, and the world, Alara and Leo are my family. I am in love with her, and I will spend the rest of my life protecting her and our children from anyone who dares to harm them." It was a stunning public declaration, a grand gesture of absolute commitment. He had not only defended her, he had claimed her, proudly and without reservation. He had chosen love over reputation, family over finance. Alara stared at him, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sorrow, but of overwhelming gratitude and love. He had seen her, all of her, and loved her anyway. He had become her shield. The aftermath was swift. Marcus Thorne, exposed and facing legal action, disappeared. The narrative in the press immediately shifted from scandal to a fairy tale romance. Julian's bold, heartfelt declaration had won over the public, and his company's stock, after the initial dip, soared to an all-time high. That evening, back in the quiet sanctuary of the penthouse, with the children tucked safely in bed, Julian found Alara on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "I meant every word," he whispered into her hair. "I love you, Alara." She turned in his arms, her hands coming up to cup his face. "I love you, Julian," she said, her voice thick with emotion. And there, under the quiet watch of a billion city lights, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was a kiss that sealed their pasts and promised a future, a testament to the fact that the strongest families aren't always the ones you are born into, but the ones you build. 1 year later, the penthouse was no longer a silent, minimalist space. It was a home, filled to the brim with the beautiful, chaotic clutter of a happy family. Children's artwork adorned the walls, a brightly colored playmat occupied a corner of the vast living room, and the balcony garden Alara had planted was now a lush, thriving oasis. It was Lily's birthday. The apartment was filled with the sounds of children's laughter, the crinkle of wrapping paper, and the sweet scent of a homemade chocolate cake that sat on the kitchen counter. Julian, wearing a casual sweater and a genuine, easy smile, stood watching the scene, a look of profound contentment on his face. He watched as Alara helped Leo light the candles on Lily's cake, her face glowing with a serene happiness that seemed to radiate from within. In the past year, they had settled into a beautiful rhythm. They were partners in every sense of the word, navigating the worlds of parenting and board meetings with mutual respect and unwavering support. Alara had even started taking online courses in landscape architecture, pursuing her passion with Julian's enthusiastic encouragement. The children were thriving, secure in the unconditional love of their unconventional but fiercely devoted family. Later that evening, after the last of the party guests had gone and the children were fast asleep, Julian found Alara on the couch, curled up with a book. The apartment was quiet now, a peaceful hum replacing the earlier joyful chaos. He sat beside her, taking her hand in his. He didn't say anything for a long moment, simply enjoying the comfortable silence between them. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was Lily's drawing from all those months ago, the 4 stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. It was worn and faded from how many times he had looked at it. "A year ago," he began, his voice soft, "Lily drew this. She said it was our family." He looked from the drawing to Alara, his eyes full of a deep, abiding love. "She was right, but I want to make it official. I want to make it forever." He slid off the couch and knelt on one knee before her. He opened a small velvet box to reveal a simple, elegant diamond ring that sparkled in the soft lamplight. "Alara Hayes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved me. You and Leo saved me. You taught me how to live again, how to love again. Will you do me the honor of marrying me? Will you be my wife?" Tears welled in Alara's eyes as she looked down at the man who had become her partner, her defender, and the love of her life. Her answer was a choked, happy sob. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger. A perfect fit. He stood and pulled her to her feet, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke of 1,000 shared moments and the promise of 1,000,000 more to come. Their journey had started on a cold park bench, born from a place of desperation and a child's simple kindness. It had weathered storms and scandals, and had emerged stronger and more beautiful. For they had learned that true wealth isn't measured in stock portfolios or square footage, but in the quiet moments of shared laughter, in the comfort of a hand to hold in the dark, and in the unwavering belief that you are home. It showed how a single act of compassion, sparked by a child's pure heart, can build a fortress of love strong enough to withstand any storm. If this heartwarming tale touched your soul, please like, share, and subscribe for more soul-stirring stories.